We are live on MythVision podcast. I'm back. Had to take a few days off, relax, calm my nerves, go hang out with the wife and the kids. I have a special guest, Dr. Allison Jr. joining us today. How are you, Dr. Allison Jr.? I feel like that's a long way to keep repeating your name. I just call you Dell, but
That's fine. That's fine. I'm okay. I think I haven't really thought about it today. Been too busy, but probably fine. If I weren't fine, I would have thought about it. How about that?
Hey, I'm glad you're joining me today. This is my first day back doing lives. In the past, I think I've been like 5-6 days since I've done some recordings, and I'm going to get our intro started here. I just want to let everybody know I'm going to start taking Saturday and Sundays off. That way I can relax and enjoy my family time. But I love you, and thank you for tuning in. I hope you learned something new today.
Don't any of you have the guts to pay for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision podcast. Dr. Allison, I really appreciate your time and effort joining us today. You have many, many works. If I could say so myself, I mean, you have a lot of a rap sheet, many books you've written on. I've got a bunch of them here. I'll show you guys on screen in just a second, but I want everybody to know, if you don't know who he is, Dr. Allison Jr. is Princeton Theological Seminary's Richard J. Dearborn Professor of New Testament. He earned his master's and PhD from Duke University. His academic research is focused on the historical Jesus, the Gospel of Matthew, the Saying Gospels Q, early Jewish and Christian eschatology, interbiblical exegesis, the history of the interpretation and application of biblical text, and the Jewish Pseudepigrapha. How do you pronounce this? I always jack up the word. Pseudepigrapha. See, I always call it Pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha. I think I lost you. Dr. Allison? I think he was raptured already. I didn't know it was the time. Dr. Allison, are you here? Did he just get sucked up into heaven, everybody? Welcome in the chat. Oh, there he is. He's not there. I knew it. The rapture's real. Everybody repent. I knew it. Oh, he's back. Heaven didn't take you.
No. Oh, no, that's not going to happen.
Oh, man.
Sorry. I think it had to do with my something plug thing over here. Anyway, I hope we're okay now.
Hey, we're okay. I was just plugging you away. You have a rap sheet as long as I don't know, as a long rap sheet of your skill set, what you've been doing for a long time. And I'm just happy to have you here. I look forward to going back up there to Princeton and interviewing you in person like last time. Maybe get some of my Patreon questions and let's have fun. But first, everybody should get a copy of your books. I mean, there's a ton of them. I'm not making this up. You've also co-authored and edited and things like that. The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, History. This is on Audible now. Every one of your publications are through an academic press. So I'm surprised they did an Audible version. If you're like me and you want to drive and listen. But tell me, is this the latest and greatest right now?
What does that mean? The latest and greatest?
It's just meaning the newest publication you've put out.
Yeah, that's the newest one you can get. The book that was below that won't be out until July. So yeah, the book that's not even out yet. Okay. It's done, but Erdman's doesn't even have the blurbs up yet. And it has next to nothing to do with Jesus. It's sort of my update on William James's varieties of religious experience, but that's cool. Bible stuff. It's different. Okay.
Yeah. No. Religious experience, kind of a mystical, personal, subjective experiences that people go through. And me and you've talked about that. There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? So, no. I mean, we've talked about it. So
So the book is in part an attempt to destigmatize things that just happen to people who are perfectly sane.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things you told me in person. You're like, I'm not crazy, but I have had some experiences. This book, The Historical Christ and the Theological Jesus, I find that quite interesting how you titled it. And then, of course, your commentaries I've got. Are these the original publications that you had? You handed me this, actually, when I was in person. You have the 3-part.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the International Critical Commentary on Matthew, I suppose, right? Or is that James?
Yes, Matthew.
That's Matthew. Yeah, that goes back. There are 3 volumes, and they were published by T&T Clark in the 1980s and 1990s. And the first one I actually wrote in my 20s, so I consider it, not my mature work, but the volumes have been very well received. They're standard volumes on Matthew.
Yes, sir. I go to them all the time when I'm trying to find out a pericope and what's being said there. So I wanted to give a plug to you on your books. Please get you a copy. This is what motivates many of the authors who do come on the channel to join shows like this, to advertise the work and to get this work out there to educate the general public. Also, the Patreon, if you haven't considered joining early access, there's tons of material. I'm continuously working. I've got a lot of lives coming up, which means I'll have a lot of pre-records that'll show their way up there, and you can help support us here because we could use the help. All right. Now, I was thinking of up close like this, or I was thinking we could go with the Greek background.
It makes no difference. If you look, you know what? If you go with the Greek background, I'm going to try to figure out what it says. Okay, so let's. I can see agape there. You don't want me to.
No,
do that.
In your commentaries, and of course. We're losing him again. We lost him again, ladies and gentlemen. Just bear with us. I don't think heaven's going to keep him. So he's coming back down in a moment. And I'll get your super chats next. Dr. Allison, let me change my settings to 720. That might maybe help us here. Wonder if I stop my camera. Bear with me just 1 second. Let's see if I can make this work. See if it'll let me change it while I... No, it won't. Okay. That did not work like I wanted it to. I think I'm running it at 1080p, which might be why his is lagging. This happens from time to time. How's everybody in the chat? Ye of little faith. Christian Michael. Gnostic informant. All right, he's coming back. So let me try something. I'm going to try and see if I can't cancel out this 1080p because I bet it's going to give me a problem again with him. Hold on 1 second. You know what? I don't think it's going to let me change it in the middle of a live. What the heck? That's no good. Should allow you to change your hold on, let me try this. Nope. Wouldn't let me do it. Oh well, we're waiting on him to come back. I see you guys in the chat, everybody. Thank you for the welcome back. Mythix me. Welcome back, S-Duck. Gnostic informant, tell him to refresh, exit, and come back. What up, my peeps? Glad to have you back, Derek. Some time off was rejuvenating. Absolutely. I spent some time with my wife and kids at the beach just down the road. Okay, Dr. Allison.
So I deeply apologize. I haven't had computer problems in a long time. They just happened right now. I think I'm okay. What I went over and I did something. We should be okay. All right?
Yeah, and I just hope it's not me because I have my settings up to 1080p. So
No. What happened is the internet disappeared on my machine. Okay.
We need to write a book about that. There's something going on. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much, though, for coming back in here. Let's jump into some questions. I had questions myself reading this. Can I tease the audience? I got to tease the audience.
Okay, sure.
This amazing book. I am blown away already. comparing it to contemporaneous apocalyptic literature, the tribulation. This idea is not like only found in the New Testament. Your commentaries, 3-part commentaries, studies in Matthew, of course, really interesting work. The New Moses, which in the vein of Matthew as well, this idea, but I'm sure you would argue Q has it all in there as well. The historical Christ, which really caught my attention the way you titled this, and the theological Jesus. And then this one right here is interesting because I'm going to actually be having Amy Jill Levine on, which that means I don't have to buy 2 different books. I can get both of you for 1 book. Anyway, there's my plug. We'll get into questions now, Dr. Allison.
Okay, thank you.
Then, yes, sir. Gnostic informant, you have attained true gnosis. Thank you, Robert. Did the eschaton of Mark 13 fail? Or is there possibly a misinterpretation on my part? Love your work, Dr. Allison. Go subscribe to his channel, by the way.
Okay, so the question is this is fail, right? Did the eschaton of Mark 13 fail? All right, so that's a complicated question. Here's what I think. I think that the early Christians thought that when Jerusalem fell, the end would come. And Mark is written slightly before 70 or slightly after 70, and so it's all still mixed up. That is, the fall of Jerusalem and the end of the ages will coincide. And I think this view probably goes back to Jesus, because I think Jesus himself prophesied against the temple and had the idea of the eschatological destruction and rebuilding of the temple. And then what happens, of course, is that Christians after 70 have to figure out how to sort things out. So the way I read Luke is, I think Luke clearly distinguishes between AD 70 and the end of the age. He's writing after Mark. So, yes, the thing that Mark envisages does not come to pass. I think Mark would be astounded to find out that we're still around here in the year 2022. Okay, I don't think you get the sense from his text that the world is going to go on much longer. Amazingly, given that I spent all my time on Matthew 24, which is Matthew's parallel to Mark 13, is actually very difficult to interpret, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it. It would make most sense if it were written in the year 70, because there are places where it seems to me Matthew thinks the temple is going to be destroyed and then the end is going to come immediately. But I think Matthew's a little later than 70. I think Matthew's somewhere in the 80s, perhaps. So I'm not quite sure what to think about it. But it's possible that Matthew read this discourse attributed to Jesus the way some of the later church fathers did. And they would look at it and they would say, well, it's about the end of the world and Jerusalem. That is, it's about 2 things at once, okay? And it's possible that Matthew thought like that the destruction of Jerusalem and all the chaos of that time was sort of typologically the same as the end of the world, so that he actually conflates them. But it's a very difficult thing to sort out. But on the surface, Mark, in my judgment, thought that the end would come in connection with all the trouble surrounding the temple. So I guess the answer is yes, and I don't think you're misinterpreting the text, okay? I think that's correct. And by the way, I should add to this, if you'll allow me, that I agree with some of the earlier critics, such as Martin Werner or Albert Schweitzer, that a lot of early Christian theology is an attempt to come to terms with the fact that the world is continuing and that it did not come to an end. If you look at the Gospel of John, for example, at the end, chapter 21, there's this discussion between Peter and the risen Jesus. Did Jesus really say that he would come before this guy dies? And the answer is no, he really didn't say that. But behind this passage is the conviction of some Christians that he did say this. And so they're disappointed, right, that it hasn't come. And I think the Gospel of John is like much of early Christianity. It's a sort of attempt to move from the horizontal to the vertical because the horizontal hasn't panned out. And so instead of looking towards the end, you begin to look up. And you can even argue that Gnosticism in part, at least Christian Gnosticism, is in part a response to disillusionment with history, and that what you do now is you look for the divine in the vertical realm, not in the near future within the historical realm. You're escaping history, which has been disappointing, right?
Yeah.
And, the rabbis, I'll stop with this, but the rabbis take not a dissimilar move. If you read the Mishnah, there's almost no eschatology in it at all, right? But I think it's because some of these people look back and they've been through two messianic revolts, and the end didn't come, and they just want to do something else now.
Do you blame them? I don't blame them. That'll get people to stop wanting to think that way, I would suspect. I mean, obviously they'd hope for a better future, but yeah, that would be catastrophic. Okay, so just to kind of give you what kind of pain we're already in, we got like 15 super chats. So there's a lot of questions here. I hope you have 3 days. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Ye of Little Faith, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate you, man. Seriously, thank you. What critiques of the resurrection of Jesus have you received? I think your recent book. And while you do that, let me turn this air conditioner off, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, that's a really interesting question. So there is a journal, I'm afraid, maybe it was called Biblical Research. I'm sorry for my memory, but it is doing an issue on this volume, right? And there are 4 respondents to the book. And I was really disappointed when I read the essays in that there's actually very little disagreement with my substantive conclusions. So from that point of view, it was disappointing. I thought the respondents were very interesting. I enjoyed reading them, but I had trouble writing my response to their papers because usually people say things like, Allison is a moron and here's why, and then you can respond to that. But if they say, well, this is very interesting and it makes me think about something else, then you can't respond to that. I actually had an email just this week from Tom Wright, and N.T. Wright has read the book, and it was actually a pretty friendly response. He did have a couple of complaints. He thinks that I should have spoken more about the other prophets in the first century and thereabouts who died with their causes. He thinks that's really important for things. I dealt with them in a paragraph, and part of my reason for doing that is that we don't know much about these people at all. In fact, they just show up pretty much, most of them, in Josephus, who thinks they're embarrassing and doesn't give them a fair hearing. So we really don't know much about these people. I don't think we know enough to do anything with them. So that's one complaint that he had. But at this point, I got to be honest, I don't know of any really severe criticism of the book, except for there's an online video, a podcast by a woman named Lydia McGrew, who is a Christian philosopher and evangelical. And she's got an hour where she just goes on and on and on about this book. And she focuses on the chapter on rainbow bodies, which for me is a purely hypothetical chapter. All I'm doing is say, look at these Tibetan traditions about disappearing bodies, some of them in recent times, some of them supposedly from eyewitnesses. And I just gathered the data. And then I said, honestly, I have no idea. I don't know anything about or that much about Tibetan Buddhism. I don't know the people involved. I haven't been to Tibet. I don't know any Tibetic languages. Let's just be hypothetical. So if these stories are all bunk, what would follow? And if some of these stories are true, what would follow? I was being purely hypothetical and completely honest. And she just goes, well, I better not say anything. I just
Yeah.
thought it was amazing. Whatever the cause, that chapter created a lot of energy in her. Let's just put it that way. A lot of energy.
Yeah.
And I don't think myself it's a fair reading, but so I won't respond. But that's the most negative thing I've received so far.
Yeah, I'm a skeptic, right? I know of her. And I think the only like critical thing that I had, it wasn't even really critical. It was like, could we look at this differently as the women at the tomb? Yeah, but we talked about that. And like, why is Paul leaving that out? Yet the Gospels, if it's an androcentric early church, the Gospels bring it in, but Paul leaves it out. Are these androcentric and these aren't? I mean, like, so we had a little, you would maybe start on this a little differently.
Yeah, but again, you have to remember we're doing history, or at least in the context I was discussing things with you, we're doing history, and historical conclusions always have to be modest.
Right.
So it doesn't bother me at all that you have a different conclusion.
Right.
Because I can't be dogmatic about much of anything, Yeah, I just can't.
I think that's the most respected position you can have. I think it's one of the reasons I really appreciate your work as well.
Well, one of the things I tried to do in the book is in the subtitle, the word apologetics occurs and the word polemics occurs. And I try to sort out as best I can all the arguments. And I try to be fair to everybody. And actually, at one point, I say, well, this is my position, position A, but I'm going to do my best to defend position B. Here it is, right? And play genuine devil's advocate.
Yeah. That there's so many super chats. I'm going to try and get everybody. I like doing these because it lets everybody get to live through us and ask these things like they're sitting in front of you in real life. So thank you for being patient. Stop scamming, man. Thank you for the super chat. Good to see you here. Hi, Dr. Dell. In your view, was there a motive to fabricate that Jesus was a carpenter or son of a carpenter? I don't see much motive, which leaves me wondering if it's historically accurate.
Yeah. So if I had to guess, why not? That is, I'm not sure that there's any reason for this to be invented. The church fathers, by and large, aren't really enthusiastic about this because it's often considered menial work, right? There are some late rabbinic texts where carpenter is a word for scholar, but apart from Geza Vermesh, I don't think anyone ever picked up on that and thinks it's relevant to the first century. One thing, though, that I have thought about, if Jesus is some sort of woodworker or stone worker, some sort of laborer, you can ask how much work was there in his village, right? If it's a small village, is he busy all the time? And it turns out there was some study done on this. I think it was a German book. Not too long ago, but it's all about carpenters and related workers in the ancient Mediterranean. And one of the things he shows is that a lot of them traveled a lot. And it just raises the question, well, if Jesus was some sort of laborer, maybe a woodworker, and he moved around from place to place, right, to get employment, then maybe that was his natural way of life. Maybe he wasn't home much anyway, even apart from the religion. And maybe later on, when he's walking around and going from place to place, maybe it's just who he is because he's grown up this way. He's just been a laborer his whole life. So the question is there a reason? I don't think so. So I'm inclined to say yes, he probably was. And then once you say that, you can say, well, so what? And I've just raised one possibility.
Right.
Maybe so what? Maybe the guy just liked moving around. I'm a homebody. I have to be really motivated. I would never walk around all the villages. That'd be terrible. I want to be at home.
I'm like you. I really am. It's tough to get me out. Thank you so much for that support. Doc Pluralmanat. Now get ready. They're going to be testing your brilliance here. The Epistle of Barnabas refers to the author of Enoch when quoting from it, but fails to do so when quoting Matthew, knowing it was written. Could he be using a Justin type memoirs of the apostles?
Okay, so I think two things here. One, it's possible that Justin Martyr already has something like a harmony of the synoptics. So there have been some people, some scholars who have argued this. One of Justin Martyr's disciples was Tatian, who wrote the Diatessaron. In other words, he wrote a harmony of the Gospels where he puts them all together. And some of Justin's quotations are mixed, jumbled together. And some people have looked at it and they have said, well, it looks like maybe he's already using a harmony, so that Tatian got the idea from somebody else because his teacher already has this. But I think Justin must know different Gospels. So there are a couple of places where it looks to me like he knows Matthew. And then he doesn't just refer to memoirs of the apostles. At one point, he refers, it would seem, to Peter's memoirs, because when he refers to memoirs of the apostles, he's referring at this point to something that is only in Mark, and it is not in Matthew or in Luke. And you know, from Papias, Eusebius, we have this tradition associating Peter with the Gospel of Mark. So I find it unlikely that Justin Martyr didn't know Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Whether he knew John, that's hazy. But it is possible that he also knows a harmony. And if he does, it might have been easier just to say the memoirs of the apostles, or just to say it is written. But I could add here that the tendency in the early church is frequently not to cite or not to attribute quotations from the Gospels. Often they'll say Jesus said, or just as it is said, and you can debate what the cause of that is, but it's a long time before people like Origen are clearly saying, okay, this is from Luke, now I'm going to quote from Matthew, then I'm going to quote from John, and everything is perfectly clear. It's just not perfectly clear early on. But okay, I will say this. I am convinced that Papias was early and that he's first part of the 2nd century. And I do think there's sufficient evidence that he knows not only Matthew and Mark and can talk about them separately. There is some evidence that he also knew Luke.
What do you think about the idea that vice versa is the case, that Luke knows of Papias? Have you ever looked deep into that? Dennis MacDonald, he thinks that there's something going on there, that he agrees with you. There's something there that seems to be speaking.
So if you look at Papias and Luke's prologue, you can see some common vocabulary, and it's very suggestive, right? But there are three camps now with regard to the date of Luke. So there are the people like this includes Adolf Harnack, who think the text is early and pre-70. There are lots of people now who are trying to push it into the 2nd century. And I assume Dennis would be in that camp, okay? I'm in the old stick-in-the-mud, old-fashioned thing that it's between the two, and that, again, it's about the same time as Matthew. I'm one who doesn't see the secondary or the 2nd century concerns that a lot of people do. I don't see Marcion here in the Gospel of Luke. I hope someday to have the time, to find the time to work through this, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not closed-minded about it, but I have as yet been unconvinced that that Luke is post-90. But you may know there are some people now who see evidence that he knows Josephus.
Yeah, you're not convinced?
I'm not. So I'm not convinced. No,
okay.
But I haven't written on it yet. And I should always, so go back to, let's be modest here, right?
Yeah, okay.
But doubly modest if I haven't written about something, because I write in order to figure out what I think. I don't come to conclusions and then write about them. That would be utterly boring. What would be the purpose of that? The purpose of writing is to figure out what you think, right? And since I've never sat down and systematically reviewed everybody's arguments, pro and con, nobody should pay too much attention to what I have to say about this. But I have not yet been convinced.
Doc Pluralmanat, thank you for the support, my friend. Seriously, if I missed anyone in saying that, I really do appreciate it. Ethan Bergen, I apologize on butchering your last name there. Can't stick around, but MythVision rocks, and Dell Allison is one of my favorite scholars.
Well, thank you very much, but that's not a question.
Sometimes they're just showing love. They just show love.
Sometimes okay, well, I'll accept that.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
thank you.
I really appreciate that. Clark Morlich, thank you so much for the super chat. What is the difference between your approach to New Testament history and Dr. Mike Licona's?
Okay, so Mike's a friend of mine, but we see things very, very differently. So Mike is an evangelical, and Mike is an apologist, and Mike's books and articles are attempts, I think this is fair to say in general, to substantiate the history of the New Testament. And our disagreement comes in what you think you can prove or establish. And so Mike thinks you can establish a lot more historical facts than I do. I'm in an odd position. So with regard to lots and lots of passages in the Gospels, I look at them and I say, well, I don't know. So if you look at the pigs going off the cliff in Mark 5, I don't know what really happened, okay? I'm frequently like John Meyer. So John Meyer, if you know his 5 volumes, The Marginal Jew, he frequently, goes through all these pages and page after page looking at some particular passage, and he ends up with some conclusion like, well, maybe there's some historical event behind here, or it's likely there is, but I can't really give you the details. So I frequently end up like that. So I don't share Mike's robust confidence in the historicity of the Gospels. So he blurbed my book on the resurrection, which is very kind of him. But he also says in passing that he thinks you can conclude a lot more things than I do, right? And that is his view about lots and lots and lots of things. I will say this: I have respect for Mike because Mike has he first of all, he tries to engage modern scholarship, and he also got a PhD in New Testament, and he has changed his mind on some things. And I always like people who are able to change their minds, right? I think
even in light of possible employee, he got in trouble for changing his mind about some things, which you got to give him some respect for trying to do that. I mean, that's not easy to do. We actually talked about you on one of our episodes. We were getting ready for this debate between him and Dr. Ehrman. And I interviewed him, of course, and I said, what do you think about the idea? I try to get him to put on the skeptic glasses like you do. He didn't put them on as well as you can put them on. But I mentioned how you thought, I said, if there was an empty tomb, not suggesting there was a real historical thing like that, and it's not comparative to other mythologies where the god's body's missing, things like that. If there was an empty tomb, what happened to the body? And you point out, well, you don't really know, which you once again say, I don't know. But you went with, I would guess the best explanation would be these magicians. And maybe your mind has changed. Maybe you have a different alternative.
No. I think that's the best skeptical scenario. So what did Mike say to that?
He said, his face is like, what? Like, are you kidding me? Like, he can't imagine that being like even, he'd say that's probably one of the more least likely, right? That's what he says. Yeah. I thought it was like unbelievable that you actually said that. I was like, whoa, like for me, because I'm like, wow, you actually
look. So N.T. Wright admits tomb robbery was fairly common in the ancient world. We have a number of inscriptions which are prohibiting people from moving bodies
for the death penalty.
We have lots of magical papyri where you're supposed to use body parts from people who died violently, right? And so if I were a skeptic, I thought the tomb were empty, I would just say that. And by the way, if this were tomb robbers, they're not going to put the stone back in place. They're going to hurry up and they're going to run away. And actually, I would say that, that place in the Gospel of John where the garments are sort of rolled up, in a nice, neat pile. I actually think that's probably an early attempt to say it's not tomb robbers. Don't have that thought, because tomb robbers, they're not going to, fold this up nice and neatly and put it off to the side.
Is that also why you would say they put soldiers at the tombs in Matthew?
Well, I think that's a legend, so I don't.
Right. I agree. I'm just saying.
But, yes, it's apologetical. It's to say that the body wasn't removed by human beings. It had to have been a divine miracle. So, yeah, I see apologetic in the Gospels already thinking about that possibility, or already concerned about it. And, I think John 20, from one point of view, is historical, because when Mary finds the tomb empty, she says, well, who took the body? Where did you put it? I mean, right? Because that's her first thought.
Right.
Well, it's thinkable in the first century.
Yeah, like you wouldn't think that necessarily today. If we went and buried someone and you wouldn't go.
No. But you in the 19th century, tomb robbery was really common, because autopsies were starting to become mainstream medical stuff, and they needed fresh bodies for the autopsy table, so all the students at the University of Edinburgh could come and watch the great professor cut a body apart. And that's actually behind the famous story. I don't know if you know the story of Burke and Hare, but they're two of the most infamous murderers in the 19th century. And they were digging up bodies and taking them to a particular famous professor at the University of Edinburgh. And they finally decided, this is a lot of work. Why don't we just kill people? And we'll just take them to the professor and say we dug them up.
No way.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So, but anyway, there was an underground economy of body parts in the 19th century. It's a different motive in the first century, but again, when I went to collect the texts, I was surprised at how many texts I found which refer to or speak about tomb robbery.
Thank you so much for that, Clark, and your answers, Dr. Allison. Doc Pleuromenade is back. Mark 2:20, but the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away. Thematically looks like an innovation of Greek rapture stories as a sense of absence versus Paul's theology of presence.
Okay, I don't read that much into it. First of all, I don't think Jesus said that. I think that's an addition from an early Christian who's transmitting the sayings before it. So that's the first thing. But I think taken away there is not a rapture idea. I think it's just a way of saying that he's going to be gone. He's going to be absent, and I wouldn't want to read a lot into that. So, I'd have to sit here and I'd have to look at the verb, right? I'd have to go back and look at the verb and see how it's used in all sorts of different sources. But off the top of my head, I've never had this thought before. But I'm also not sure Paul has an idea of a rapture, because he does have this weird idea in 1 Thessalonians where the saints are caught up in the air, mm-hmm. right? Which is where modern dispensationalists get their ideas about a rapture. He does seem to think of that. And it is an interesting question whether there are any Greek ideas or myths that have influenced Paul. But my inclination is to think that you already have this in Judaism. So maybe he's thinking of something kind of like Enoch. Remember, Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. And then also there's the story of Elijah going up. So I'm not sure you have to have Greek ideas of rapture to have a rapture idea, but I've never spent the time.
It doesn't negate it.
Pardon?
It doesn't negate it, but either way, I mean, because this is something that I think there is the potential for eclectic ideas, not just not just from one idea, Jewish world, but both could play a role. I think that Hellenism.
That's right. So I guess I was reacted to Greek rapture story, and I would just say there are rapture stories out there, and they aren't just Greek. Okay, but my main point would be, without spending a lot of time with this, off the top of my head, I've never had this thought. So I guess that's all I want to say. I've not had that thought about reading that into Mark 2:20.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate Doc Pleroma Not. Stop Scamming Man. Do you think the strange young man that runs from Gethsemane minus loincloth was also supposed to be the young man in the tomb in Mark?
Well, so I doubt it. And the reason I doubt it is because I don't think the guy in Mark 14 is an angel, and I do think the guy in Mark 16 is an angel. In the book, in the resurrection book, I think I have some long footnote giving all the reasons, but that's certainly how Matthew read it. It's certainly how Luke read it. And in Jewish tradition, angels are young. In fact, you can still see this today. If you go into an Orthodox church, and if you look at the icons of angels, and then compare them with icons of saints, the saints are usually old. If they're men, they got beards, and long hair and all this stuff. They look like they're going to fall over. The angels are always young, and that's the traditional iconographical picture, that angels are young. And you can find any number of old Jewish texts and pre-Christian texts where angels are young. They're just said to be young. So I don't think myself that this is a young man. I think it's an angel with a proclamation who has inside knowledge.
Did you think you signed up for this, Dr. Allison?
Signed up for what?
I titled this Challenge Dr. Allison Jr. You didn't even know what I titled this video.
No, I didn't.
No, but it's fun because I've got more academics coming later this week. We're going to be having these. They're really like Ask Me Anything type of episodes.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But they're kind of challenges for let you think. So, a certain scoffer, thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. Matthew 24 says people will see the sign of the Son of Man as opposed to them seeing the Son of Man, explicitly as in Mark. Could this refer to a mass experience such as our Lady of Fatima or Matthew 28 where some doubted?
Okay, so that is an interesting observation. It does say the sign of the Son of Man. And if you look at the word there, it is sometimes used for Jewish signals and Jewish flags. And in Christian tradition, this is frequently read as the cross. And I think it's already possible that the sign of the Son of Man is some sort of heavenly cross. And it's actually not that different than what you have in Constantine, or at least Eusebius's report of Constantine and his army seeing a cross in the sky. So I don't think it's a mass experience because I don't think for Matthew it has happened yet. Okay. So I don't think it can be a reference to something like Fatima. Mm-hmm. But I would add this, that when it comes to 1 Corinthians 15 and the appearance to the 500, I do wonder about that, whether that is something like Fatima or something like Constantine's army seeing something in the sky. If you have 500 people, first of all, you wonder how many of them really know Jesus well, and you wonder if he's shaking everybody's hand and there's a receiving line. An appearance to 500 people makes me think of something in the sky, something to a large crowd. So the parallel with Fatima is an apt one. And by the way, I don't know what the heck Fatima was. From what I can tell, it's a real event. And it looks like thousands of people saw something really strange. And it wasn't Mary. But the weird thing is that the children who prophesied the event, prophesied the time. And at the time when Mother Mary was supposed to do a miracle, this happens. So even if you could explain it as some sort of rare event having to do with the sun, or some type of rare halo or whatever. By the way, I have yet to come up with a perfect parallel. I've been looking for a long time. I can't find anything that matches these descriptions. But the weird thing is that even if it's some known but rare astronomical event, it happens right at the time when the little girl said it would. So it gives Roman Catholics a lot of comfort. Roman Catholics of a certain stripe. I look at it and just say, wow, that's really interesting. Wonder what that was.
I need to look into it myself. I've not dug into it, but I definitely would look into it. Thank you for that support. And of course, your question, a certain scoffer. Christian Michael, I appreciate the support as well. If 1 Corinthians 2:7 equals formation, what is this? Is this Greek?
Christos, first and last letters of Christos.
So of Christ or Christos in believers for glory. Colossians 1:24 through 29, 27, 2 Corinthians 3:17 through 18, Philippians 3:8 through 15, gnosko. Can the rulers in context be non-human? Humility.
Okay, so this is the issue, of whether the rulers who crucified Jesus are being thought of as human or as powers. There are three usual ideas here. One is that they are human, one is that they're supernatural, and the other is that it's a mixture of both, because the rulers of the world are sort of pushed or guided by these evil powers. So let me be honest. Honesty is the best policy. I wrote about this somewhere. I can't remember where. Oh, now I remember. Okay, I wrote about it somewhere. So I looked into it, and I decided that the best reading of this was human ruler, okay? But at this point in time, this was years ago. This was probably, I wrote that in 2008. I can't tell you why I came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
So this is useless. I know what conclusion I came to, but I can't reconstruct the reasons why I came to that conclusion. I will say, though, that that's a very common conclusion, and probably the dominant one in the commentaries down through the centuries.
So
but it's an interesting possibility.
I was going to tell you my conclusions. Why not? If I have a conclusion or a thought on it, I'll throw it out there. After reading The Origin of Satan by Elaine Pagels, I was personally convinced. I used to be a mythicist, as I said, right? So these had to be demonic powers. These had to be forces beyond. And she made me interact with the real social world of in-group, out-group ideas, whether it be the Jews and the early Christians, and they started excommunicating early Christians or problems that were going on. So what do you do when you say if a Christian today, like a fundamentalist, is talking about another group? Man, that doctrines of Satan. These people are, they practically will consider them satanic or evil or something spiritually controlled by demonic powers. And it seems applicable to see the both and not either or in that situation to me. So I was convinced, thinking, the archons of the age, these are the powers and the principalities that rule the air. They also control the wicked people that are involved in doing these things. That's how I came to this.
So if you email me, I'll go back and find the original document, and I'll send you my reasons for thinking otherwise. But, it might be embarrassing. I might have agreed with you, and I'm thinking that I came to some different conclusion. So you started out by saying that I've written a lot, and I have, that's a vice. It's terrible because you too many books in the world, and it's wrong to be contributing more. But for me, it really is the case that I've written so much that usually when thinking about what I've written, I either cannot remember what conclusions I came to, or I can remember my conclusions, but not the reasons I came to them. Right. Especially if it's a subject that I don't lecture on in class, and I'm not a debater. I'm not on the circuit. I don't do all that stuff. So I'll write about something, and then that's it. And I don't even think about it for the next 30 years. And then somebody, 14 years, and somebody comes on and says, what do you think about that? Well, yeah, I remember coming to that conclusion. But the sad case is that that's true for lots of things that I think. I work through, and then I come to my conclusion, and then I remember that, and then I go on to the next subject.
Yeah, no, you did this when we talked about, we were talking about the secret gospel of Mark, and you're like, I wrote about this somewhere. And I'm like, well, I want to read it one day, but I want to give a special thank you to Christian Michael for the support. Seriously, I really appreciate that. Stop Scamming Man is back again. Do you think the strange young man, hold on, did we get this already? Yeah, we already got this, didn't we?
Yeah, we got that one. We got that one.
Strange man. Okay, thank you for the support. I didn't know if I accidentally went back up further than I should have. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. Good to see you here, of course.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Nope. You had something.
I was just going to say the passage in Mark is a very strange one, and a lot of people have looked at it, especially modern people, and said, well, maybe it's the author's sort of "I was there" thing. If so, it's very, very oblique. But what it's always reminded me of is Joseph in Egypt with Potiphar's wife, because she tries to seduce him and she grabs his clothes and he runs away. And especially as that story is told in an intertestamental text in the Testament of Joseph, the language is very much like the language in Mark. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, it's hard for me to think there's a Joseph typology going on here.
Yeah.
But the idea of grabbing this guy's garment, who then runs away and he doesn't have any covering, you can find it elsewhere.
I want to send you, just because I know you read so much and you're so focused. We talked about this whole only focusing on the Hebrew Bible or Septuagint, never really looking at Greek ideas. I want to send you Dennis MacDonald's explanation for the naked young man and just see what you think.
Okay.
And when you get the time, I know you're a busy man, but I'd love to get your insights and maybe even have a conversation one day. The problem is, why have a conversation if you haven't actually immersed yourself in his material to at least know what's going on? You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah.
It would just be like two different worlds meeting. So Caleb Jackson is back, and he's a huge fan of yours, by the way. He's a good friend of mine as well. If you had to, what natural explanation would you propose for Buddhist rainbow bodies?
Okay. Oh, gosh. So it depends on what you mean by natural explanation. So the most obvious one is that this is some sort of religious myth and that people perpetuate it knowingly, and that it's sort of like, I don't know, the holy fire in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which magically shows up every year. And the hierarchs who were there, they tell the same story that it was supernaturally lit. That's a very hard one for me to buy. So I think that they're actually giving the people what they want. That is, if they came out and said, God didn't show up this year, it would just be horrible for the cause. So that's a possibility, okay? The stranger one is simply that human beings have truly amazing powers and that Tibetan monks can do amazing things, and they simply have managed somehow through some mental weirdness to do this thing, all right? So it'd be like, it's sort of like saying, well, I've looked at the evidence for levitation. I think it happens. What's the explanation? You'd have to say that it's some sort of occult or hidden human ability that manifests itself in weird conscious states. Well, Tibetan monks who spend their entire lives meditating on certain things, they must experience some weird states of consciousness, right? And so maybe they tap into some odd human ability. I mean, those are the two explanations out there. One, it doesn't happen. It's just a fable. And the other is, these people can do something nobody else can do. I should add this. One of the things that's so weird, I didn't stress this in my book, is that when people attain...
Is this the resurrection book?
Yeah. This is the book on the resurrection. I have a whole chapter called Rainbow Body. So I assume this is what Caleb is referring to. So the point is that if you look carefully into Tibetan tradition, the most dramatic stories are those in which whole bodies disappear, or you're only left with, fingernails and hair. But most of the time, according to the tradition, most of the time, the bodies simply shrink. And there are actually a couple of pictures online, who knows what to make of them, of shrunken corpses. People that are in their clothes, sitting in a lotus position, and the clothes are 2 or 3 or 4 times way too big. I remember asking a neuroscientist who had been to Tibet and had done some work with meditation and Tibetan monks and so on. I said, should I even bother thinking twice about this? Is it just all stories? And he said, no, they're not all stories. And you can go online and you can see pictures of a couple of these corpses, and they've shrunk. And so the idea is they've obtained rainbow body, but they stopped at a certain point. Whereas some people, when they obtain rainbow body, they just shrink all the way. So these are kind of halfway there. I was honest in my book. I just said, I don't know what's going on. I really don't. It's purely hypothetical. If this happens, what follows? If it doesn't, what follows? And that's all I've done with it. And I can't do anything more because I'm not an expert on the subject. Well, I do know this. I know somebody's very close to me, belongs to a Tibetan lineage, a Buddhist Tibetan lineage, and weird stuff happens. I'll just put it that way. Some weird people do some really weird things, or at least it seems like they do. Okay. So who knows?
Thank you. Caleb's back again. Good to see you here. And he says, do you have any opinions on the undesigned coincidences methodology used by people like J.J. Blunt and Tim and Lydia McGrew?
Okay, so I have to be honest here. I don't know who J.J. Blunt is, okay? And with regard to the McGrews, I said something about Lydia earlier. So I'm not sure what he's referring to by undesigned coincidences methodology. Can I just ask, are you talking about their use of Bayes' theorem or something else?
So Caleb, if you're in the chat, I'm sure he should be still in the chat. Go ahead and if you don't mind, I'd love to get his thoughts in particular, because I wish I understood the undesigned coincidences methodology better. But it's this idea that it's almost like, and correct me if I'm wrong, everybody in the chat, it's almost like the gospel authors aren't dependent off each other. These differences, you find these strange coincidences that actually line up, and it seems like another harmonization method, in my opinion, in some sense. I could be wrong. Okay, hold on. He says, it's the idea that the Gospels convey in a way that is subtle and unintentional to verify that certain events are historical.
Okay, so again, I would need some examples. So is this like the green grasses in Mark, and that's a sign of an eyewitness, or Jesus was on a cushion in the boat in Mark 4? That can't have any explanation other than that it happened. I'm not sure what the word convene here means. Concur, maybe? Or, if I look at, let's say, the resurrection accounts, they look to me like they don't harmonize, right? And that they're very different. But I would say this: I think there are places where you can look at, let's say, the Gospel of John, and things that go on in the Gospel of Mark help explain what's going on in the Gospel of John. But I think myself that's because John probably knows these texts and he can assume certain things. But without having a couple of examples here, I'm just sort of stumbling around. So forgive me for not knowing the details of this.
Yeah.
I will say this. I'll just add that while he's much more skeptical than I am, I'm a big fan of David Friedrich Strauss and his Life of Christ, written in the middle of the 19th century. And one of his contributions was to look at harmonizers and to show that, again and again and again, they pass belief. And I was taught by my professors, and I think it's still the case, that if you read Strauss and you read him with an open mind, you're going to be allergic to harmonizing, all right? So in my mind, if I look at the history of the discipline, Strauss is the end of harmonizing, okay? That's one of the things he does. That's the end of it. And I think everything else since then has been apologetics and not history.
Wow, point blank. Thank you. Mitch Mazarol, we're going to try and get through these. We got like 10 more. So bear with me, everybody. Can you ask Dell if he's familiar with Dr. Catherine Hesser's work on Jewish slavery and antiquity, and would he recommend her as someone you should interview, or perhaps someone else on the topic?
No. You should interview her. I don't know her personally, but she's an excellent front rank scholar, and she knows what she's talking about on this subject. So yes, and she knows 1,000 times more about this subject than I do.
So do me a favor, Mitch, can you help me out and email me? Please message me, let me know her name. And if you want to do a little legwork for me, just for anybody who's ever interested in hearing me interview somebody, find their emails too, because sometimes I'm Googling and I'm trying to get there and I've got to go to their academia side. If you can find their emails, I will email people and jump on that. I'm interested in expanding my horizon big time. Thank you for the support. Great to see you here, and really enjoying this live stream. Avaros is here. I knew you'd show up, man. You're supposed to be in class right now. He says, against heresies, Irenaeus, citing Polycarp, says that Jesus was around 50 years old when he died. Could it be that Matthew and Luke put Jesus' birth close to the 1st century AD because that spans 70 years until Danielic destruction of 70 AD?
Okay. Yeah, I've never known what to make of this tradition that Jesus was around 50 years old. I simply don't know where it comes from. I don't know what to make of it. I also know that people did mess around with calendars, and they messed around with Daniel, and chrono-messianism, or whatever you want to call it, probably played a role around there in the 1st century. But the details are really sparse, right? So if some early Christians were playing around with numbers, it's just not clear. That is, you have to wait till what's his name, end of the 2nd century, before you get anybody who is doing numbers for us publicly, right? So you have to read between the lines. So I think that probably some of that is going on. Whether that's an explanation for that tradition, I don't know. I don't see any indication off the top of my head, now that I'm trying to think through these texts. I don't think that Daniel 7 plays any role in Matthew 1 through 2 or in Luke 1 through 2, but it is certainly the case that the book of Daniel does play a role throughout the Gospels. So somebody must have been looking at this stuff. We know later on lots of people are.
You wrote in your book, The End of the Ages Has Come, just to kind of point out what I think might be a connection in this next super chat. It's the same gentleman who just super chatted this to add. That puts the crucifixion exactly at 40 years till 70 AD, approximately this idea of 40 years. And I'm trying to get the page. I highlighted it. No, wasn't in the Gospel of Mark chapter. Okay, here we go. Not in 4th Ezra or Sota. Let's see. So you talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I think this is the Qumran community on page 10, where you say states, and this is your dissertation for anybody who's interested in actually, they really should get it. States that 40 years must elapse between his death and the dawn of the Messianic epoch until the annihilation of all men of war who returned with the man of falsehood. If the duration of the teacher's ministry be estimated at 40 years, and if this figure be added to those just given, the result is 490, the classic 70 times 7 prophesied by Daniel 9:24. And anyway, I just wanted to point out,
so there is chronomessianism in the scrolls, right? And we know people were messing around with this stuff, but the speculation about Jesus is like so much else, or his date. It's speculation. Also, so I'd have to go back to the 1980s. There was a point in time when I decided, okay, I'm going to do serious New Testament chronology. And one of the things I have to decide is whether Jesus died in 30 or 33, right?
Right.
So back then, for reasons I no longer know, going back to what we said earlier, I decided on 33, all right? But I've read some work recently that says it could be anywhere 28 to 33, and I thought, you know what, maybe it could be. As for the birth, even if you follow Luke and Matthew, you can't get a year. You just have to say, it's Herod the Great and 5, 6, 7 BC, something like that. So I guess the long answer to that is maybe. I don't know. I'd have to think about it more. To think about it more. But I will say that even though New Testament scholars don't like to think about these things, there was calculation with the scriptures. And by the way, you could just see that at the end of the book of Daniel, where you get more than one date. It sounds like somebody had a date and figured out what Jeremiah was prophesying, and it didn't come, so you get another date. It's a bit like the Seventh-day Adventists, in the middle of the 19th century, where you get a date and it doesn't work, so you get another date, right? Daniel has.
Is that how you see the dates when he says the man who, or blessed is the one? Actually, before that, it talks about 1230 or 60, and then 1290, and then it says 1335 days.
It looks to me like a rewrite, given the fact that it didn't happen. So I don't know off the top of my head what sources I found this in, but I also found that there are some early Islamic sources where you have a date, and then you get a second date, and you actually get a third date somewhere. Wow. And what's interesting is that these things weren't just forgotten. For some reason, they were remembered, and it looks embarrassing to me. If I'd been writing Daniel, I would have got rid of the false one and just substituted something else. But it's like it's already there, and so you have to reinterpret it, right? Somehow.
Yeah. You say that about the Testament of Moses, actually, and there's this debate that happened between John J. Collins and whoever the other academic was. I just remember John because I interview him often. And I think I highlighted this. Yeah. Hold on, here it is. However, that may be, certainly the conviction that the return to the wilderness would be herald the redemption is well attested, and we have already seen that the authors of Daniel 8:1 through 12:13 and of the Testament of Moses identified the Hellenistic crisis of the 2nd century BC. So no, it's before this, but you point out like chapter 8 and 9 in the Testament of Moses are talking about things back then, but 6 and 7 are talking about Herod. And so there's this debate of like, is this text really old, or is this like new and they backdated ideas or something? And you've come to the conclusion that they kind of like, once again, added a date, but in this case, a couple chapters of keeping the thing alive.
So that goes back to John Collins's early work, and I looked into it again recently, and I think he's probably right. So people. So I went to graduate school in the 80s, late 70s and 80s. And one of the things we were taught was redaction criticism, and then literary criticism was just coming along. And so we were getting away from the old source criticism, and we were getting away from the idea of biblical authors as editors who are just passing down tradition. And so everybody then becomes T.S. Eliot or Shakespeare, and everything fits together. It's just wonderful. But a lot of these texts really do have gaps and holes and look peculiar at points, right? And I have no trouble thinking that some of these things in the Old Testament, they're just multiple sources put together, right? And I'm not completely sold that Mark is this great literary figure. I think parts of Mark read like somebody passing on tradition. So I'm a little old-fashioned there.
Yeah, you're old school on that one. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Christian Michael's back again. Do you think Isaiah 11, 1 through 2, plus 5, plus 10, LXX inspired the creed of 1 Timothy 3:16 and Romans 1, 3 through 6? In my opinion, text rehearse manifestation of Isaiah 11 in B, I translate opte angelos.
Angels, yeah. Uh-huh.
In 1 Timothy 3:16, scene of messengers.
Scene of messengers. So I guess I should get a text out here.
Pull out the Bible.
So yeah. So I don't have the Bible memorized. Some people do, but I don't. So the first thing there is that I think part of the background of Romans 1:3-6 is actually the prophecy of David's lineage to Solomon in 2 Samuel 7, because that says that God will raise up a son, right? Will raise up a son. And here in Romans 1, we have the son who is raised up, and he is the son of David. He's descended from David. Now, that there could also be a connection with Isaiah 11 is quite possible. I don't recall wondering about this, but that's also a messianic text. And one of the things Jews did is that they mixed all these things together. So they bring together messianic text. The text in 1 Timothy 3:16, scene of messengers. That's interesting. I've always assumed there that angeloi were angels. So I would have to go back and think about this. This is the one.
Great indeed. I'm just reading the ESV in English here.
Okay.
Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory.
Yeah, that's a weird passage because it's not exactly chronological, is it? But it's also clearly some kind of, I think it's obviously some kind of early creed or tradition or hymn or some kind of preformed something or other. So my honest question is, I've never thought of this. I've never connected 1 Timothy 3:16 with Isaiah 11. So the answer is, go for it. Maybe so. I don't know. Maybe if I looked into it, I'd say maybe not, but I don't know.
Thank you so much, Christian. Appreciate that. Susie Bailey. Oh, thank you so much for the super sticker. Wow. Showing some love. I really appreciate that. No questions from you. I did want to make a statement while we have Susie's super sticker up here real quick on Undesigned Coincidences, that as I was looking at my Bible app here, he said, and my friend Caleb said, Derek, undesigned coincidences are when certain details in the gospel subtly connect together in a way that seems undesigned, as to invoke a memory shared by the authors rather than a literary creation. So I still feel like it's kind of an apologetic to try and show that there's like this, that accidentally came out. Why? Because they're both having a memory of a real event, or it's some way to try and connect these gospel authors back to this is like eyewitness or something to that effect.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the eyewitness thing is a huge discussion by itself.
You can't even remember what you wrote. So anyway.
Anyway, I would need some examples. Okay. There certainly are these odd details in the Gospels that I don't know what to do with, but sometimes I think I do know what to do with them. So I have read commentaries in which people have said, well, when Jesus makes everyone sit down on the green grass to feed the 5,000, that must be an eyewitness memory, and it means Passover is near because it's spring and so on. I've never thought that. I've always thought this is typological. So here I guess I'm doing the sort of thing Dennis MacDonald does, but I'm doing it with the Bible, not with Homer. But Jesus, he feeds the people. And he gets off a boat. This all happens right by the water. And it says they are like sheep without a shepherd. And he tells them all to sit down, to lay down. And this all happens on the green grass. And then he meets their needs. So if you know Psalm 23, right? This is all by the still waters. It's about shepherd. It's about sheep. It's about meeting people's needs. And it all happens when, you're sitting down or laying in the green grass. So I think that's what the green grass is doing there, right? I think it's serving a typological function. And of course, there are other places in early Christian literature like Revelation where Jesus is the shepherd of Psalm 23. So, occasionally you can look at things like this and say, oh, I don't, maybe, could be an eyewitness, but I've got some other explanation, which is just as good here. But I will say the cushion in Mark 4, Jesus sat down on a cushion in the boat. I've spent a lifetime looking for that cushion elsewhere. I haven't found the cushion yet. Maybe it's in Homer. I mean, maybe Dennis has the cushion thing, but I can't find it.
Thank you once again, Susie, Caleb, for following up on that. Avros is back. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul does not believe in the same body leaving the tomb, but like the seed case left in the ground, his spiritual body left earthly body lying decomposing.
Okay, so that's not a question. So
I think maybe he wants you to critique that. I think I know where you would stand. You do think it is this idea of a body, but it may not. There's a transformation taking place, correct?
I just think it's a radical transformation for Paul, and that I just don't think to use the category of resurrection in a Jewish context. Here, I do agree with Tom Wright. I think it means bodies, bones, flesh, graves, and so on. The difference from Paul for Paul is that he thinks that this body is radically transformed. Can I give you a few examples to get your thoughts on, just to throw a few out there? Like Hercules, he burns in a pyre.
And he goes to heaven, but he's continuing to have babies in heaven. Like he can't be completely non-corporeal. So my question is that an example? Could an example be looking at Livy? I actually was reading your commentary on Matthew where you quote Livy to show that we're talking about Romulus and Remus, but Romulus is ascending in his body. He's taken.
Okay, so look, I think one of the problems here, and it's a sort of leftover from systematic theology, is that we're assuming Paul has clear thoughts. I'm not sure he has clear thoughts. He doesn't believe in a disembodied immortality. But I think he agrees with the Corinthians who are complaining, and the idea of a corpse coming out of a tomb is that's just, I don't know, vampire, zombie stuff, right? And he can't stand it. He knows that's not true.
Right.
And he's then trying to find a sort of middle place here. It's not zombie land, but it's not disembodied. And so at the end, he actually uses the language of mystery at the end of 1 Corinthians 15. And elsewhere, he'll say things. He'll admit, well, we see in a mirror dimly, that kind of thing. Paul, I don't think, knows, let's say, in the language of, what is it? Of philosophy, clear and distinct idea, right? Does he have a clear and distinct idea? I don't think so. I think he's groping, and that's why he finds analogies, and that's why he goes on. It's a pretty long chapter, right? And it's almost as though, this is a good question. What do we do here? So my belief is that if you look at the Greek, it is the same body, but it's radically discontinuous. Now, what sense you make of that, I don't know, but it's the same body. It's the same self. Okay? All I can say is that it's not Zombieland, right? But it's not disembodied immortality.
I got to get you and Dr. Tabor to hang out and have a conversation about this particular subject, because you and him, I think, would have a great conversation. Disagreements, agreements, I don't knows, all of that together. Thank you, Alvarez, for that question. Cowboy.
Let me just add one thing. There must be 10, 15 pages on this in the book on the resurrection of Jesus, where I discuss at great length what I think Paul had in mind.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely get the book if you haven't. Thank you. Cowboy 1000, what does Dr. Allison think of The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel? Did you even read it?
Okay, so I was teaching in a seminary class. This was a long time ago. And I said something, probably talking about the historical Jesus, and a student raised his hand. And he said, but Lee Strobel says, okay? And my response was, what are you doing reading Lee Strobel? And his response was, to have answers for people like you, Professor Allison, right?
Wow.
So I did actually read one book by Lee Strobel. He's a popular apologist. I don't know him personally. But I'll just say I don't think of him as an historian, okay? They'll just leave it with that.
Thank you so much for that. I think less is more on this. So thank you so much. Cowboy 1000, thanks for the support. Melody Joy, thank you so much for the super sticker and showing up in the chat. Love you. And seriously, thank you for sticking through all of this together. Oh, snap. My boy Steven's here. So what exactly were the stoicheia of this world, according to Paul in Colossians? Stephen, you might have shown up just a tad bit late. This is one of those toughies, but go ahead. I'd love to have you.
I don't. So they are obviously transcendent beings or invisible beings of some kind, but Paul or the writer of Colossians doesn't spell out what they are. So we don't have anything like you have in later Gnostic texts where you'll actually get a genealogy and the names for all sorts of beings that are in between, the supreme Godhead and human beings. But Paul does live in a richly populated universe. So he's not like a modern, boring Presbyterian who thinks there is God and human beings.
Hold on. You're a Presbyterian. What are you
Well, a lot of it's boring. So I like John Wesley more than John Calvin. Anyway, so Paul, or the writer of Colossians, and they may well be the same, doesn't fill out the details. And then, you have these things like thrones and principalities and so on. They're clearly names for invisible powers, but that's about all you can say, right? And I'd like to think that some of the early Christians didn't demonize them all. So one of the things I don't like about Christian, the dominant Christian tradition has been that when it thinks of invisible powers, it thinks good and bad. It thinks angels, demons. It thinks God and Satan. And if there are, other things out there, I would guess it's like everything else in the cosmos. There must be a spectrum of things. And I would like to think that some of the early Christians didn't think all of the elements and the beings and so on were of one contiguous nature. But who knows? Because the text don't say. The text don't say.
Stephen, thank you for.
I was going to add, there you do get speculation. For example, where do demons come from, and what does this have to do with the sons of God and the daughters of men in Genesis 6, and when do demons first show up, and all this stuff. But if Paul already has details about things like that, we're not privy to them. We just have to be honest and say we don't know.
Thank you for that. Hope that helps, Stephen. We'll be chatting soon, friend. Thank you. Medalia, good to see you here. Thank you for the support. And no actual question, she says. Just want to show my support and that I'm enjoying listening and learning. Thank you both. And Derek, I'm smiling to see you back. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Avaros is back. He can't get enough. And we just talked on the phone before we did this live, actually. He says, did Jesus think of himself as Son of Man? Daniel 9 says, like Son of Man, which is divine being and not a son of man or human being.
Okay, so this is really a a difficult and involved subject. If you read New Testament scholars, you'll find that they're all over the place here. So I assume by Daniel 9 he means Daniel 7. So that's probably a misprint, and that's where the one like a son of man occurs, and that's the only scene in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Bible, of the Last Judgment. By the way, it's a dream too. It's very interesting. Daniel says it's a dream. So if Jesus is thinking about this text, he's actually interpreting somebody's dream. That's an idea I like to play with. Anyway, so if you're a German of the mid-20th century, the dominant idea was that there was a notion of the Son of Man as a heavenly redeemer, and that Jesus did not identify himself with that redeemer or that person. And that's why he speaks of him in the third person, the Son of Man, right? Instead of I will do this or I will do that. So that remains one possibility. And I don't know if you've had John Cullen's wife on here, but
she won't come on for no one. And I twisted her arm and she's just like, leave me alone.
I think if I recall rightly, that she adopts this position. There are other people like Geza Vermesh who say, well, Son of Man was simply an idiom, something kind of like a pronoun, and kind of like the English one. And you say, well, one must do one's duty. And you say things like, the Son of Man doesn't have anywhere to lay his head. It's just a way of speaking about a group or oneself indirectly. And the idea here is that Jesus used an Aramaic idiom which wasn't loaded with meaning, but Christians after the resurrection connected that idiom with Daniel 7 and then turned him into this figure. The other option is that Jesus did in fact think of himself as this figure in Daniel 7, and then scholarship splits, because there are those who think that Jesus is speaking solely of himself, and then there are those who think he's talking about himself as the head of a group, that he's actually talking about the saints of the latter days, very popular in 20th century British scholarship. So how do you want to sort through all of those things? It would be ridiculous for me to say I know the answer and I can tell you the truth. I have my opinions. I've actually been on more than one side in this debate. So I've been around long enough to defend one position and then to say, no, I think I'm on this position now. And then since arguing that, I think maybe I'm going back to the other one. So this is, if you know scholarship, modern scholarship, this is a huge question. It's a gigantic headache. And it's also involved with what you make of the parables of Enoch. So one of the famous intertestamental books is First Enoch, and one section of it is the parables. And there is a Son of Man in that text, and he seems to be a glorified figure. He seems to sit on the divine throne. It looks like he's the judge of the last day. And the question becomes, did Jesus already have this sort of idea in mind? If Jesus went into a synagogue and said, the Son of Man is coming, would everybody think of something like this? Or would people say, what are you talking about, right? So this gets very, 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 very complicated. But I will say this. I'm one who thinks that there's an early high Christology, and I think there's an early high Christology because Jesus himself had a high Christology. I think that's where it comes from. So I think he thought he was somebody, and I believe he thought he was somebody really special, and probably somehow identified himself with this figure in Daniel 7. How exactly he did that, I don't know. I've speculated, maybe imprudently, that maybe for him it's his heavenly double, and that he somehow is the same as his heavenly double, but there's a figure that is him but not him at the same time. You can't find lots of texts about these heavenly doubles. It's a weird thing. Anyway, I'm just rambling on here, but maybe that's what you need to convey the fact that this is an unsettled question and everybody disagrees about it.
I think that's a really good answer, actually, is giving people more reason to not have such high confidence in knowing and being certain. I think that that's a very good practice. So anywho, thank you.
Well, okay, I'll support you on that. And one of the ways of supporting that is to look at the word consensus and how it's used. So I don't use it. I hate it. I think it's a lazy excuse to quit thinking. But if you look at what the consensus is this year about whatever it is, it's not the consensus of 40 years ago, which was not the consensus 40 years before that. Right. There's no reason to think that whatever the consensus is today is going to be the consensus down the road. So all you can do is do your best and take some bets, right? Wager, come to your own conclusions. But the fact that even something is a consensus doesn't tell you what's true. You know, lots of people can agree on a falsehood.
Can we get a round of applause in the audience? Honestly, I'm serious, because this is showing not only maturity in what you do, because I talk to hundreds of people that are academics, and there's something about when I'm speaking to academics where they just kind of have this moment where I'm not sure. Actually, it could be this, it could be that. I tried to pin Amy Jill Levine down on what does the prodigal son parable mean in its original, when it was used, what, all that. She's like, I don't know that, but using historical methodology, let me try and tell you what I think. And I'm like, this is great. I love it. So thank you. Seriously, moving on. Gray's 174. Do you take the grave robbers then socially contagious visions resurrection alternative seriously, or is it just a fun idea that you throw out there?
No, it's not a fun idea that I throw out there. I'm being deadly serious about this, okay? So when I'm playing devil's advocate, I am trying to think things through historically, and this is a serious theory. And actually, I guess I should add this. If I were a skeptic, what I would do is I would say there are three elements that gave birth to resurrection belief. The first one would be grave robbers, so the tomb is empty. The second would be visions, right? And I'd have to argue that these visions had no veridical elements, that they were hallucinatory in the derogatory sense. But the other thing I would insist on, and people don't insist on this, and I don't know why we keep having these discussions where people leave it out, but the context of the eschatological teachings of Jesus are vital here, because Jesus thought the end, or hoped that the end was near. And if the end is near within his context, it means the resurrection is near. The category is already there to interpret what happens. So if I were an apologist, I would work to come up with reasons to oppose that hypothesis. And when I looked through the literature, I did not think the reasons were sufficient.
I just want everybody to see your book, because it is fantastic. It's not an apologetics work. It is a legit laying out various ideas, including apologists, including skeptics. You just make up your own mind. But I really enjoyed this work, and that's one of the reasons I've been constantly talking about it with you on the show. So in this book in particular, you raise some of these points. So I just want everybody to know. Grays is back again too. He says, do you know anything about religious cultures leaning into hallucinations and taking them for spiritual insight instead of taking antipsychotics? And if this could relate to the appearances of Jesus? You and I've had this talk actually in person off camera in your house, but yeah.
Oh, well, this is a huge discussion.
I'll be back in 2 hours, guys.
Look. I really can't address this seriously, because I think it involves the nature of the world. I think it involves the nature of the human mind. And my view of the world is very strange. It's not mainstream. It's not mainstream Christian. It's not mainstream academic. So I believe that
we're getting into subjective land, right? Like, admittedly.
Well, no. Well, I don't know what to say about that. I would want to argue my points. Okay. I would want. In fact, I think you can make a case that some visions are veridical, as when, for example, more than one person at a time sees something that isn't there or not there according to normal norms, and there are tons of these, and some of them are very well attested. Or when people have visions that bring information from outside that they don't have access to. But my own view is that a veridical vision is the product of your brain and your imagination, and which works with your culture, and whatever incoming information there might be, however it's coming in. This means also that I'm like William James and I'm like Aldous Huxley. I think it's possible that sometimes drugs, what they do is they mess with the reducing valve, or the main parts of the brain that keep us right here doing all the things that help us to survive. And that when certain things aren't functioning, maybe you're able to experience things that don't belong to the material world that are really there. So that's how weird I am. Okay. But it is a view that you can find in William James, who was one smart cookie. And it's a view you can find in Aldous Huxley, who was truly brilliant and informed.
You're awesome.
I know some other people, including some neuroscientists, who agree with me on this, and I've been able to talk to about it. So the question of hallucination is really, really, really complex, and I don't like the word hallucination because of its pejorative content, usually in our society. So I prefer vision, with the caveat that I don't always know how to explain them. So if I use the word vision, it doesn't mean that I'm a reductionist, right? And people often assume, you say it's like, it's just a dream, or it's just a vision, or you're just hallucinating. I think on a case-by-case basis, you need to think about things, and that the world's weirder and more surprising than lots of people think.
Thank you so much for that, Grays. And you and I talked about this a little at your house when I was up there. Stuart C. says, thank you, MythVision, for hosting Professor Allison. We should be thanking Dr. Allison for coming on to MythVision, actually. But thank you for your support. I really do appreciate you coming on here, Dr. Allison. And let's make that trip happen. I got to come back up and see you. Grays 174 is back. Okay, thoughts on Carrier Celestial Jesus. Have you done, this is the better question, because thank you for your support again, but a better question is, have you actually investigated his book? Have you read his book on the historicity and dug any significant depth into this?
So I read Jesus is Dead
by Dr. Price.
Yeah. This is Carrier's book. So right. I read a number of articles by Carrier, and then there's also a book where he uses Bayes' theorem to urge that Jesus may not have existed or probably didn't exist, but he doesn't go all the way. So I don't know what the name. I don't remember the name of that particular book. Right? I wasn't convinced, but I simply have an old-fashioned view of Paul. All right. I have an old-fashioned view of Paul. So I think when Paul talks about Jesus, he's talking about an historical figure. I think that when he talks about his brothers, he means his brothers, which means that he's an historical figure. He is now a celestial figure for Paul. He becomes that. But I don't think that is what he is for Paul consistently. I think that if you look at Philippians 2, the structure of the hymn is celestial, earthly, and celestial. I think that's what is going on there. So whether you use the language of incarnation or something else, I'm not sure Paul has a coherent idea here, but I don't see it. I think he thinks Jesus lived in the recent past, and he refers to the night in which he was betrayed or handed over. I don't know what else to say. I don't think so.
Do you think one day, as we're leaving this question, do you think one day you might read his book on the historicity?
No, I think that's the one I did read. Right? Is that the one with? So don't I remember? I remember reading a book, and he said there's going to be a second one after it.
Yeah, I think he did. Jesus Christ, or Jesus from Outer Space, which is the newest one that has like Jesus going through the levels of heaven.
Okay, I haven't read that.
I was trying to see on my bookshelf. I can't see. It's kind of dark. I would grab it for you. It's the thickest one. It's like based on his peer-reviewed work and stuff he's trying to show. He used the rank Raglan arguments and things to point out he's more mythical than historical, and therefore he takes this probability. But I think a lot of people also miss there are people who are fans of people who give off, I think, some type of reputation that might reflect the people themselves. But also, I know Dr. Carrier has not always been kind in his writings. I'm sure that rumors pass, but his point is he thinks there's more of a mythical Jesus than there is historical. And I didn't know if you've read that book on the historicity just to get your thoughts, or if you would one day. But if you have read it, he goes through everything, the different various dying and rising God motifs, to just showing the prior probability of these things going on, and compares them to other, what we count as non-historical figures, Romulus, et cetera, to say, what are the likeliness that this guy existed? But he gives a 33% or whatever chance, or 30, something like that.
So, yeah, if this is the same book, I remember that he said it was unlikely he existed, but he could have existed and then been mythologized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that Jesus in the Gospels is mythologized. It's a question of degree. Okay. So I see more history there, and I guess you would say less mythology. But I could go on. I could list things that I don't think happen. I could list things that I think are stories. I don't see history in the birth narratives, for example. So if you want to use the language of myth for Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2, that's fine. And there's certain scenes that have been mythologized. But at the end of the day, I think this is an historical figure who had high thoughts about himself, had his own high Christology, and was in fact a teacher. I think that's the best reading of these things. And, the miracles don't bother me the way they do some people. So the truth is that we have millions of firsthand reports of miracle stories. And the simple fact is that there are these religious figures throughout history who gather around them miracle stories, whatever the explanation. So in the 20th century, we had a guy named Sai Baba, who was a Hindu holy man.
I know.
Alleged holy man. And I know there are questions about his character and so on. But the thing is that I've read these interviews, you read people who were around him, and they're full of stories. He was transfigured into light. He multiplied food. He does all of these things, right? But actually, when you look into it, most of them happened. In other words, people thought they saw these things happening, and we have films of this guy. I know people who went and saw him. I mean, he's real. So he's a real person, and he brings into himself the mythology of the religion around him. He's a magnet for it. He's also a wonder worker, but he really is a wonder worker in the sense that Oral Roberts was a wonder worker. And I've seen films of Oral Roberts, and I know people who knew Oral Roberts. And he was a real person.
Right.
And however you explain these healing stories, there he is, right? There he is. So I think Jesus is that sort of person. I think he's a remarkable human being who drew to himself all these narratives and ideas that are part of the culture. And some of them he shares, and some of them are imposed at a later time.
So I want to try and obviously limit our conversation for the next 15 minutes to give you a little bit of a chance to say, the next time this guy contacts me, I'm not going to ignore him because he tried to be fair with my time. We were having so much fun. Time literally flew. We're at 1 hour and 43 minutes in. So I want to try and cap us off at 2 hours to allow you to go. Let's get through these super chats. Please don't send any more in case I accidentally miss yours. If you have a question, if you want to show support, you're more than welcome to do that. I just don't want to leave anyone hanging. MJT532, do we know that Daniel 9 reinterprets Jeremiah?
Most of Jeremiah was in circulation before then, and the 70-year thing seems to me to be a giveaway. That's just it.
Yeah, I've been told that it definitely was, but thank you.
Yeah.
Stop
I think
Scamming Man is back again. Any idea what Paul spoke of when he mentions man of sin?
So there are Antichrist ideas in the air already back in the first century. And what happens is you have this notion of eschatological bad folks, and then this gets focused on a particular figure. You can see this in the book of Revelation. So I think he has in mind something like the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. But again, it's not filled out. Probably it goes back to Antiochus Epiphanes, and who was the bad guy in the 2nd century in the book of Daniel, and the language surrounding him then gets moved to the future, to the latter days, and so you get the notion that there will be some great opponent of God at the end of time. I think that's what he means.
If we were to pin the guy down, though, the emperor, who was
Caligula, maybe?
Yeah, I was thinking possibly.
So, if you look at Mark 13, it's quite possible that at some point people who are passing on this tradition, if it's a pre-Markan speech, it's quite possible if this comes from the 40s that some people are thinking about Caligula, and I think Gerd Theissen argues this in a very interesting article. But what Paul is thinking, I don't know. Again, it's so I'm sitting across right now from a library, and the library is a seminary library, and it's one of the best in the world. And if you were to look this up, you would find 50 answers. And the reason you would find 50 answers is because there's no clear answer. So you can speculate. You can speculate about what Paul thought, or if you're a particular sort of person, who this person is going to be, and so on. But these things that are just referred to in passing, all you can do is say, well, there are similar ideas out there, and this is probably what's going on in the background, and then you just have to leave it at that. Okay?
That's what you do in your introduction on this book in particular with your dissertation. You're like, there's just no way to know for sure. So thank you. DDR, thank you for the super sticker. I did not see a question. I appreciate the support, the love. Seriously. Susie, thank you for the claps there. Finally catching up here. John Estes, thank you so much for the super chat, actually. I was making sure I didn't miss your question. DDR, Alan Bird in the house. Everybody's clapping, showing love. I think they're really enjoying this. Conan Lee, good to see you here as well. Thank you for the support. Really, seriously, all the love from everybody is just amazing. It's been a tough week. And I really appreciate you joining me. It's great way to start back. Hop Black Desiato, thank you so much for the super chat. Could the depiction of Pontius Pilate being reluctant to condemn Jesus be historically accurate? It seems unlikely given that we know about him.
Yeah, so I think he was involved in the crucifixion of Jesus. It's probably the case that in Jesus's time and place, the Romans were the only ones who could put somebody to death through crucifixion. And I think you have to look at the sources and say that what you see really clearly in Acts is probably playing a role in the synoptics already. So if you look at Acts, every time Paul goes in front of a Roman official, the Roman official says, I don't see anything wrong here, right? It's just every single time. So it's a literary motif. It probably has some basis in historicity, because I'm sure some of the authorities just said, get these religious people out of my hair. This isn't what I care about. But it's very hard to read Acts and to see that motif and to think it doesn't have something to do with the synoptics, where Pilate seems to be reluctant, and especially as opposed to the Jewish leaders who seem enthusiastic. So, yeah, you have to say that the reluctance raises questions about historical accuracy at that point. Although, again, I think he must have been involved. It's a crucifixion, and it's a small city, and he's there during Passover because there are a lot of people. So he's involved. How much more beyond that you could say is unclear to me.
I have a exciting upcoming event I'm going to in October with Allison Jr. or Dell. Goodness, I'm interviewing you. Sorry, James Tabor. He's going to be taking me and showing me the archaeological sites. It's not just going to be like a touristy thing, but really getting into where they do the digging and stuff. Talpiot Tomb, we're going to go check out. But also, I get to go to the Pontius Pilate throne seat where they actually found his seat, and he wants me to sit in it as a skeptic, right? This is James wants me to, he said, I really want you to feel this. You're going to sit in Pontius Pilate's seat. I want you to close your eyes and then open them and imagine here is this man that the whole Western civilization practically worships, or at least, he's changed the face of. And imagine here he was right here in this spot. It's just really cool to think about. He says, I hope when you come back, you can see on the ground and it changes how much you are valuing learning this information and stuff. So I'm definitely excited. I just don't think Pontius Pilate was going, hey, hand me that water. I washed my hands. I think he probably would have said guilty. Get the guy out of here.
That's later apologetics.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hot Black Desiato, Converse contender. Good to see you here. Have read Kirk McGregor's book, John Elder Wrote John. Have you read?
I have not read Kirk McGregor's book, and it's called John Elder Wrote John.
I think he has only so much he could say in with the super chat.
Okay.
So
I'm not sure what the reference is to. So the argument has to do with Papias and Eusebius and the question of whether there were two Johns. And so some modern scholars say that there were two Johns. One was John, the son of Zebedee, and there was someone else known as John the Elder, who was also important. And somebody like Richard Bauckham will associate John the Elder with the Gospel of John. I believe Martin Hengel did the same thing. I've never been able to decide whether there were two Johns or not. And I've also, for reasons, I have really good reasons for this, and they'll be published someday. I think that the beloved disciple, I'm with the tradition here. I'm really old-fashioned. I think the beloved disciple is not a literary figure. I think he's somebody in the tradition of this group, and it's probably best to identify him with John, the son of Zebedee. So I'm not in great company here, right? Because there's been a strong tendency to see him as an idealistic, fictitious figure, or in a lot of recent conservative scholarship to take seriously the idea that there were two Johns, and that John the Elder should be associated with the Gospel of John. But I still think basically Raymond Brown in his commentary on John was on the right track, and that he's an historical figure, and that he's best identified with the son of Zebedee, and that he lies somewhere in the tradition of the community that is producing this gospel.
Thank you
so
for
I'm
that.
thinking maybe, but this is a book I haven't read. So of course, if I read it, I might change my mind.
You are good at that. I try to be like that as well. Vaguely agnostic. Thank you for the 666. Thanks for mentioning visions. It's unexplainable, mystic experiences that keep me vaguely agnostic. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, they keep me vaguely Christian. So we have similar outlooks. I actually, I guess I said this at the beginning, so I'm just repeating myself. But my next book is called Encountering Mystery, Religious Experience in a Secular Age. So
that's the one I popped up. We'll pop that up here at the end. I'll make
sure
everybody knows.
It's not available. It's not available.
It's coming though.
It comes out in July. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vaguely Agnostic, for that. And the Vaguely Christian appreciates that. Alan Bird, thank you for the super chat. Hi, Derek. Just wanted to send some love and support for you. It has been a difficult week. Hope it is getting better. Dr. Dell is a great guest. Thoroughly enjoying Dr. Dell musing over these questions. Great guest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seriously, that means a lot. And yes, the week is getting better. Spending some valuable time with my wife and kids has been really therapeutic. And they've been like really, what do you say, really close. They come out here and bother me, and then they want to be all over me. So I'm thankful for that support and love. Wayne Rossi, thank you for the super chat. What's your opinion on the provenance of Mark? Do you think it was written in Rome, Galilee, or somewhere else?
Okay, my inclination is to think the tradition
is the last one,
right.
By the way.
Okay, so my inclination is to think that the tradition is right here. However, one of my very best friends in the world is Joel Marcus, and he's the author of the 2-volume Anchor commentary on the Gospel of Mark. And he thinks Mark was written somewhere in Palestine, maybe in Galilee, and maybe right after 70. So we've been able to talk about this from time to time, and he could be right. But if I had to wager, if I had to bet, I'd still go with Rome. Among other things, there are some interesting Latinisms there that are a bit strange, and that I think point more to more than just some acquaintance with the Roman army, which could be anywhere. And the tradition says Rome, and the tradition makes a connection with Peter, and I think there probably is enough evidence to say Peter was in Rome sometime in the 60s and was probably martyred there. So I think if you put everything together, Rome is still the best bet. And it's also possible, I'm not as enthusiastic about this as I used to, but it's also possible to understand Mark's emphasis upon suffering, and people do look at Mark and say there's an awful lot of suffering going on here, right. That this might reflect the persecution under Nero in the 60s, where he really did put away a few Christians and do some nasty things. And maybe Mark reflects that to some extent. So if I had to bet, I'd bet Rome, but there are very smart, bright people who, say either we don't know, or it's better to put it somewhere near the Jewish war.
Thank you so much, Wayne Rossi, and you, Dr. Allison, so much. Converse said, sorry, it's called a historical and theological investigation into the Gospel of John, and that he's interviewing him Thursday. So be sure to check it out if you want to find out more.
Okay. Well, I'm planning on writing a book about the Gospel of John somewhere down the road. So I'm sure I will run across it. Okay.
Awesome. So, okay, before we let you go, your books. What if someone's jumping into this, is there anything recommended? How do people support you other than just buying the books?
Oh, okay. So, I don't need anybody to support me. All right. So that's the first thing. I work at a school and have a really lovely salary. If somebody were to ask, I think the Resurrection book is my best book in terms of scholarship. I like it very much, but the most popular, the most accessible with regard to Jesus would be the Historical Christ. And if anybody cares anything about theology and what you do with eschatology theologically, I really like this book. Now, yeah, you just passed it. Night Comes. Go down a little bit. Yeah, right there.
Wow, look at the
I really like that book. It's my attempt to make sense of eschatology, both in the Bible and in Christian tradition.
It's only $2.99 on Kindle, but paperback $16.91 is not bad. You could get it used on there as well. But yeah, I mean that's a great deal. Night Comes. Yeah, I love the way you write too. You've got a great writing style. It's not dry and just kind of I enjoy it.
Well, I'm like most people. I don't like to be boring, and I don't like to read boring people.
Right? No, me neither. Especially when I'm getting ready for these shows. But your dissertation now, did you do some editing to make this book the way it looks now compared to what your dissertation actually was?
So that book went through 2 editions. The first one was in the 80s with Fortress Press, and then T&T Clark published it in the 90s, and then the publisher of this just came to me a few years ago and said, could we reprint it? And I said, that's fine. And so that's it.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I look forward to this one as well, so I can interview Dr. Amy Jo Levine. I might need you and her on for this one, since you both did it. So did John Dominic Crossan, and so I need to reach out also to him. That would be really entertaining.
AJ did the work on that book. Okay. She did 90+% on that book. Okay. I did some things, but it's really her book.
Okay. So then I need to get her on and then have you come on just to say amen. Amen.
Okay. Well, tell her I said amen. Tell her I said hi.
Seriously, though, go get a book. If you don't get a book, I can't promise you an apotheosis or whatever you want to call it for the weird world that we all live in. And consider also joining the Patreon. I work very hard at what I do. I have more videos coming out soon. Christopher Stanley will be showing back up. I can't tell you. There's a whole list. I've been emailing like crazy. I really do appreciate everybody. Dr. Allison, is there any final words you'd like to say to our audience as we're exiting this show?
Just thanks for listening. I appreciate it. I like people who like to learn.
Yeah, so. I don't know if you're ever going to get questions like you did on this show today from audience on YouTube.
Probably not. So I do appreciate them and the spirit in which they were asked.
Thank you, everybody. Go down in the description, get you a book, Amazon, look up Dr. Allison Jr. You'll find his books. And never forget, don't go anywhere, Dr. Allison. We are MythVision.
Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.